Alright, so I posted some videos just for the hell of it of me playing around with this map editor, and some people had some questions, so I figured I'd make a quick little tutorial just to show what I know. I don't know much, but for starters, to make a new map, you go File, New, and it should be saved in the correct location by default. I wouldn't mess with that. But just to start off, for any information you would need, right here in the help section, you have the contents, and it brings up a manual. Oh, where the hell did it go? This manual is pretty much where I get everything that I know, and it'll tell you a lot, but it's dense, and it takes a lot of reading to get through it. But I'll show you what I know, and anything else, any other questions, you can just see that manual or ask me. So we'll make a new one. And the size, the map that I was working on was the largest, 32 by 32. That's kind of retarded. We don't need something that big. We'll go 10 by 10. Setting. Just go summer. And any mods if you're running any, which I'm not. Alright. Use the arrow keys to navigate around. Pretty simple. This is the map. Again, simple. Game. What? Oh, this must have been old. Hold on. Save as. There we go. Fuck it. Not even gonna mess with saving it. Alright, so each one of these right here are different menus. You have tiles, objects, entrenchment, and each time, whatever, depending on what menu you have open, will determine what tool your mouse is. So right now I'm in the tile section. This allows me to paint things. And such like that. There's a few things you can do from here, just view-wise. These settings are graphical. The grid can be helpful at times. And then this AI button I use a lot. That and the grid I use a lot. And the reason for that is because what it does is it gives you shadows. So we go to the objects menu, and you have all the different objects in different categories. And then you have a drop-down menu with even more categories other than these simple ones up here, where you can find even more stuff. So we'll just place down a house. Now if you look, with the AI button on, it makes a green outline of the building. You can't see because the building is blocking it. But if we remove objects, which is the tree here, you'll see it leaves a green outline. This allows you to place things and see the hitboxes. This is what the little AI soldiers see when they move around. This determines whether or not characters can walk past through it or not. The green areas are buildings. You can't walk on them. So you can see there's a little alleyway there. This is important because sometimes you can't see these alleyways and these passages when you look at the buildings. But if you look at the hitboxes, or they're not hitboxes, I don't know what the collision box, so to speak, what this represents. It shows all the possible paths, so you can kind of tell when an area is blocked or not. The one next to it, vehicles, is pretty much the same thing. If you place a vehicle down, this makes the vehicles disappear. And again, if you look, it has the little green box saying what's passable and what isn't. To delete things, you just use the delete key. It's up next to the arrow keys. Pretty simple. More categories are, just like terrain, you have height. This allows you to make hills and things. Left click makes hills. Left click makes divots. The problem is I don't know how to level things off. So if you make a hill and decide you want to get rid of it, the only way to do that is to use the same tool in reverse. And this will make kind of lumpy. Things won't always go back to being perfectly flat. You'll end up in a really lumpy, bumpy environment. So I strongly advise not to touch it until the very end. Because if you make a hill and you don't like it, the only way to fix it is to set it back to 0, which will set everything to 0. You see all the hills disappear when you do that. And that'll suck. So if you mess up once, I don't know how to undo it, other than to just make the entire map flat again. So that's something to use very sparingly. Fields is a bit more complicated, but it can save you a lot of time. Let's say you want to make a forest over a really large area. Instead of placing each individual tree, there are scenarios. Now, there's also a way of making new scenarios. I did it once a while ago, and I forgot how to do it, but it's really overly complicated. All that you need should be in here. So they have fields, spring, Africa, summer, all the different themes. And each one is just a different environment, and it'll automatically generate it for you. What you do is you take these dots right here, and you'll see this a lot. This is how you make roads, trenches, rivers, using the same basic mechanic. You draw lines outlining the area you want to fill, and when you're done, you press enter. Now, when you press enter, it'll connect whatever last line you've placed to the beginning point. So if I press enter here, it'll do that. If I press enter here, it'll connect like that. So that's something to know. So I want to fill in this area, this whole screen here. I press enter. There you go. Now it's made that box. Press enter again, and it automatically spawns all these bushes and things. And each one's a different one. So that's 0, 0. This one is 0, 1. Spawns a different combination. Now there's trees in there. And you can just keep layering these over and over again until you have the woods to the thickness you want. And play around. Like this one, see, didn't spawn any trees that time. Different ones spawn different types of trees and bushes. That one spawned a little hay bale for some reason. I don't know why. This isn't a farm. One of the things you can set in is fill terrain. This will change the terrain to match. So see, now it spawned farm. This is really ugly and stupid, but that's what happens when you layer multiple on top of each other. I usually do the terrain myself and just use this for placing objects. So if we go back to tile and find where's grass, dark grass, and you just erase all that stupid garbage because that looks stupid. And just like before, you go to edit these objects in the terrain menu. You can't interact with these trees. You can't do it. You have to go to the objects menu where objects are. Once you highlight that menu, that means now you can interact with objects. And you can highlight all of them, just like that, and clear it. Just by hitting the delete button. And all those same objects can be placed individually as well for more precise stuff. So that's all there is to the terrain area. You have fill terrain, which paints the ground, place objects, places objects, and then modify height. That'll also make bumps and ravines. That's only good, as I said, because there's no way to undo it that I know of. If you're doing like woods and you don't really care about the elevation of the terrain, but you want your cities to be flat, so you don't want to mess with elevation in your cities or other urban areas. Check passability. That means it'll make sure that none of the objects create a giant wall. Update map, it'll automatically update your little mini map upon finishing that. If you look, you can watch. I'll do that. Watch. Why is it still doing that? Ah, there we go. So now the map is visible, and you can see it filled that in there. Go back to tile. And you'll notice, see how I have AI still highlighted? It says whether or not it's a passable area. Notice, go back to objects. See this? Some of these objects have green under them. That means characters can't pass through it. So characters can't walk through that. So if you line these up like that, that will make a wall that the little soldiers won't crawl through. This, on the other hand, will not. It's just a texture. This looks like a glitch. I would ignore that. Watch, let's see. I don't know what that is, but I think that's just a glitch. Meh, whatever. Yeah, I don't know where these are coming from. Sometimes what will happen is you'll place an object, you'll delete the object, and the green will stay lag behind. it's still there. I don't know why that's still there. Oh well. Next thing is the Objects tab I mentioned. This is where you're going to spend a lot of time placing objects. A few things you should know. This here, the player button, when you place an object, let's say we'll place a unit. This fancy Webelwerfer Panzerwerfer. This right here decides what direction it's facing. Only vehicles can do that. Buildings and things, you can't change their orientation. But vehicles and things and soldiers you can. Units you can. That controls the orientation. And this decides what faction the object will be assigned to when you place them. Now, there is a tab up here where you can add factions, but by default there are 3. 0 is always by default the player faction. That's who you will be when you launch the game. 1 is the enemy, and the last number on the list is always the neutral, meaning that's what you assign to civilians or empty items. That would essentially make them civilian. They would not be non-combatant. So if you want to have a vehicle, let's say you want to have this car parked on the side of the road, you don't want it to be shot at or interact with it. Right now it's set to 0. If you double click on it, it'll give you the information, where you can also edit it after effects. So if you accidentally place down a vehicle and you don't want it to be on that team, you can just double click on it and change it to the team you want. So player 0, and you can set it to player 1. So that means that's an enemy vehicle now. This, you want this to just be a parked car on the side of the road. You don't want anyone to control it. You set it to neutral. Now it's just a neutral vehicle. It will not, no one will be able to tell it what to do. It'll just sit there. So you can use that to make like parked cars and things. Same thing with weapons. So you place down a flak gun, it'll automatically be crewed by whatever team owns it. If you want it to be empty, you just set it to neutral, and now the gun will be left empty. But let me just go back to this. So right now it's set to 0. That means I'm placing friendly objects, things that'll belong to whatever faction I'm currently playing. So let's place down some allied units here. And now we'll place down some bad guys. We'll set this to 1 for the bad guys. Where'd the other panther go? Ah, here we go. Squads, those are soldiers. They have them labeled by faction. Set it to 0. That'll make it mine again. Alright, so we got some players put down and things. Let's move them far away. We don't want them shooting at each other instantly. So one of the things that I did, let's make a really crappy little level real quick. Just give them something to you know what, let me just open up one of the projects I was already working on. I pretty much showed you the basics already. It's pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I didn't mention was things like fences. They're pretty simple. You place them. You just drag, it'll make fences. Some of the fences are directional. For example, this one has barbed wire on one side. So if you place it this way, the barbed wire is facing up. This way, the barbed wire is facing down, facing in, facing out, stuff like that. Again, you can't edit the fences. You can place fences, but you can't click on them or interact with them. You have to go back to objects, and now you can interact with each each individual object. And now you can delete them and things like that. Bridges, same thing. A bridge, what it does is, whoa, what the heck? Yeah, see, that's a glitch. I don't think. I think that's still passable. I think it's just glitching. But the way it would work is you want to place a bridge. It's just like the fence. You drag and place. And what it'll do is it'll create a path through this non-passable area. So let's say you made a river, and the rivers are made the same way. Pick the width. Hit enter. So there you go. Now you have a river. So what happens is this is, if you look at the AI, okay, this is annoying. Hold on a second. Some weird glitch going on here. And again, to delete bridges, you gotta go to the bridge menu. You can't interact with an object. Like here in the fence menu, I can't interact with these tanks. River menu, I can't interact with the tanks. I have to be in the objects menu, where the tanks came from. Now I can interact with the tanks. So if you want to delete a bridge, you have to be in the bridge menu. Hover over the bridge, then you can hit delete, and it'll delete them. But let's make a river, just to show you how it works. Alright, so here's a river. Now, if I press the AI button, it'll show me what's passable. You'll notice the river's green. Players can't, soldiers, tanks, and things can't pass through this area. So if you want to make it passable, you have to put down a bridge. Where the heck were the bridges? Ah, here they are. Fences and bridges. So we're going to make a bridge. Now the bridges come in two orientations, really. I don't know what the difference is between special and non-special, but you place it like that at the edge, and then you drag across. And yeah, that'll do. Now, you can't see it, but essentially see what that did there? It carved out a hole in the river. So this is now passable. Vehicles can travel through here. It's an optical illusion. This is all two-dimensional, but it appears as if the vehicles can drive through. So we'll just get rid of all this crap now, because we don't need it. I think I royally messed this up, but I'm going to show you a map that I'm already working on instead of this. This is wrong. Hold on. Nope, not that one. Ah, this one looks correct. And I think I broke it. Oh, nope, it's working now. Alright. So you may recognize this is one of the levels that I've been working on forever. I keep posting little bits about it. Not much has changed. I got rid of the industrial park just because it seemed kind of out of place to have an industrial park in a residential zone. So I just changed it to a train station. So here we have a bunch of objects placed all over the place. And you'll notice it's mostly flat terrain. I didn't mess with the terrain too much because I didn't want to do anything I couldn't undo. Now, let's go to objects. What's left on this menu I haven't told you about yet? Map tool. That's really simple. There's not many map tools. There's the damage tool and script, which I don't know how to do, so I'm not going to touch it. It's set to 50 by default, and what it does is you damage things with it. So see this house? It's very pretty looking. What if I don't want to make it pretty? Click on it. Now it's damaged. Click on it again. Now it's destroyed. Don't spam the map tool too much, though, because I found out through experience that it's kind of buggy. If you click it too often, sometimes, for no reason, it crashes the game. So don't mash it too much. Just use it when you need it. But for example, if you're ever wondering how to make buildings look damaged from here instead of having to shoot them, all these buildings look very nice and pretty. There's a part of town that got wrecked. And the way I did it is you build the city like this normally, and then you just go around and smash buildings. So I can repair all of this again, it's good to give it a rest. Don't just mash the repair button, because if you click it too much, the game tends to crash for some reason. But I can fix all these buildings. And now it's all nice looking. If I want to make it look a little worse, there you go. Now it looks like crap. Which can be good in the war zone sometimes. You know, environmental stuff. Some objects do not have multiple phases. For example, these tents, you click on them, they don't change. Their health has been reduced, but the tent doesn't change. Trees, things like that. Only buildings do. So this statue, click on it, it's at half health, it still looks the same. This changes, though. Map tools. Reinforcement groups, don't know how to use those yet. II settings, still don't really know how to use those either. So now all that's left is to explain that complicated bit about start commands I mentioned. It's the only other thing that I figured out how to do. And it's a little bit more advanced than just learning how to click buttons like this. There are other buttons up here. I guess I'll go through them. Diplomacy. So this is where you set the sides. So you can add players. And you can assign them to side 0 or side 1. Those are by default the two sides. You, the player, are side 0. The AI is side 1. And every side that you add after that, so here's side 2 and side 3, the last one is always by default neutral, and every other number can be assigned to one or the other. So I'll assign this to side 0. So now if you were to play this with friends, they would assume the role. The other roles would become open for playing if you were to make it a multiplayer match, which I don't know how to do, but you could assign it so that there's multiple players on each team. That's all that is. Game type, flag control, single player, attacking side. That's just multiplayer setup stuff. This side here is where you customize the factions. That decides what teams are assigned to what number. The little picture of an airplane next to it is where you decide what faction they are. So this is where you pick their aviation and things like that. So side 0 right now is Germany. That means I play as Germany when I play when I run the simulation, when I run this, test this level. The other side is Great Britain. And when you go to aviation, it allows you to select what airplanes they have. And it also allows you to select what paratroopers they drop. So for aircraft, you have Scout. And you just have to know the names of these planes. I had to look them up each time to figure out what the heck I was looking at, because it has the plane's name, but it doesn't tell you what it is. Fighter, Paradropper, Douglas. GB stands for Great Britain, so that's how you know these are all the British versions. Bombers, Vickers, Wellington, GB. A ground attack, I put the American Thunderbolt, because I don't know if the British had a dedicated ground attack aircraft. Paratroopers, I use the gunner squads, just because they wear the red berets and they look kind of like paratroopers. That's all that is. That just allows you to pick what faction they are. And that's important because, let's see this gun here. This gun belongs to Team 1, which are the AI. I'll show you just by clicking on it. Objects. And look, player 1. Health is 100. No script ID. None of this other stuff matters. So when you place it, if you look, there's no crew there. You can see these soldiers. I placed them myself, but the crew doesn't spawn until the game starts. It'll automatically assign crew based on what faction that Team 1 is. Right now, I have Team 1 set to party name Great Britain. Now, I can set it to any other faction, Finland, Germany, Italy, Poland, USA, USSR. I have it set to Great Britain at the moment, which means British crewmen will spawn at that gun. So if you don't set this up properly, let's say this is set up not as Great Britain, but as the Soviet Union, all of the guns will be spawned with Soviet troops. When the cargo trucks go to resupply, the sappers that hop out the back will be Soviet. It doesn't. The units you place down, however, are whatever you place down. So I place British. So if I place British troops down and I assign them to Team 1, they would be commanded by Team 1 even if Team 1 was Soviet. So I can actually spawn German soldiers and make them fight on the British side simply by assigning them to Team 1. But Team 1 will be assigned British, which means all of the objects that are spawned will be spawned British. So that's how you make sure you have the correct crew assigned. This is how you make scripts. I don't know how to do that yet. This just updates the map to make sure everything is in ship shape. Updates the terrain, does the same thing. And there's a button to auto do it. So you don't have to constantly click that button. This is important. I always leave it on. What it does is everything on here is set up on a grid, as you can see. All of the objects, all the buildings fit on this grid. Now, the collision box is the box that says what's passable and what isn't. If you'll notice, you see the green underneath there? That says that this wall is not passable. It takes up half a grid. It lines up with the grid perfectly. If you want your buildings to all line up and everything to be fit properly, you have to leave this button on, toggle it on. And what it does is it makes sure that all the objects are placed according to the grid. That way everything's in a straight line, everything fits together. And this is important because if you turn that off and you place the objects without them snapping to the grid, what it'll happen is you'll place this down. Notice that the area below it is green, but if I move it, the green doesn't move. The green, it can only occupy quadrants. So if I move it like this, part of that's still green there, so that area can't be passed through. Whereas this other area over here can be. So soldiers wouldn't be able to walk by these crates because the collision box isn't lined up. So if I place it at a weird angle, it leaves green overhanging off the edges. If I push it to snap, it'll make sure that the collision boxes always line up with the object. So no matter where I put it, it won't let me place it anywhere where the collision box doesn't line up. So that's important. And it also just makes sure that all your things line up, so that if you want to place a rock wall, you won't have to worry about the rock wall coming out of alignment. So always have that down. But there are times when you don't need it. For example, if you place objects that don't have collision boxes, like these barrels, which if you notice, there's no green under them. Soldiers can walk right through them. These little barrels aren't going to stop players from walking around them. So you don't need to use that. You can place the barrels wherever you want, and you can snug them nice and tight, just to make them look nice. And that looks a lot nicer than if you had the grid on and you were forced to place them all perfectly in a grid shape. You can't get that same. It doesn't look as nice. They're not as tightly packed together. And also, just for aesthetic things, let's say you don't care about the hitboxes. Let's say, for example, you have a bunch of crates like this, and you want to put a lamppost in there. The lamppost might not be where you want it. You might want that lamppost nice and tight. You can move it right up against there, out of the way. And if you notice, the hitbox didn't extend. It still technically counts as being inside that grid square. So you can move the lamp, you can kind of cheat it a little bit so that the lamp is so it looks like the lamp is right up against it, and people will still be able to walk by. And that's good for little aesthetic things. Other than that, turning off the floor, that's kind of stupid. The grid, again, helps you measure things. When you're doing really big stuff, you can't pan out with the map. You can only move around. So let's say I wanted to place a really long road or something. This grid is very useful because it allows you to place an object on here, and you don't know where you're going. So this grid allows me to keep everything lined up. That's strange. It isn't lining up for some reason. Why isn't that not lining up? Well, you get what I mean. Perfectly straight road. Or would be if it was visible. The heck? Is everything... Ah, there it is. It was invisible for a second. That's another cool thing I learned how you can do. I'll just show you it while I'm doing it. I keep thinking of things after the fact. I wish I was more organized about this. So let's say you place a road down, and you want it to fade out, like you make a dead end, or a road is leading into another road. Do this, make a turn. Now if you notice, the road's kind of faded. That's because the occupancy is set to 45 instead of 100. I do that sometimes because I want the roads to be faded so that the snow will come through, so I want the road to look kind of, frozen. If the... See, now the road has this sort of white... The textures bleed through, so I can make it look kind of white. I can place this underneath it and give it this sort of muddy, dirty look. So I can change the appearance of the roads a little bit. But besides that, it's also useful for combining roads. So let's say we have a road going this way. And you want to have a dirt road convene with it, like connect. Make a dirt road here. Dirt road. Oi! Oh, I didn't press enter, that's why. Make a dirt road here. So what you would do is, if you place it, they kind of overlap like that. It looks kind of weird. One of the things that you can do, if you want this to overlap, you take this road, and what you do is, instead of going in a straight line, you stop, and you put segments in between. What these segments allow you to do is allow you to edit the road. Now, because I placed this second, they stack on top of each other in the order you place them down. So I want this road to go over it. That means I have to place this after. The older things go on top. So whatever I placed first is going to be on the first order. Because I drew this road second, now it's underneath, whereas before it passed over. So that's important to know if you want to have things go overlap one another in a certain way. But here's another thing. So let's say I want this road to fade where this intersection takes place. What you do is you click on one of these outer little bubbles, which you can use to adjust the width, and you right click on it, hold the right click, and then use the mouse, dragging the mouse up and down, and it'll change the occupancy. So now it's faded out. Select all points so I can move all of it at once. And there you go, so now the road fades out. And this is good for transitions as well. So one that I use a lot is, let's say we have a cobblestone road. And an asphalt road. That's kind of a sharp change. Maybe you want it to be a bit more gradual, a bit less noticeable. What you do is, next, when you draw the road, you leave, instead of going and stopping, you come a little short, and then you add a couple segments. You segment it. And what will happen is, if you click at the end here, and right click, you can make, well, not the whole thing fold, because I have all points. Single point. And now the end faded. And stretching this segment stretches how long the fade will go. So you can have it fade quickly, or you can have it fade over a long area just by stretching it. But what this allows us to do is now, instead of sharply changing over, it fades. And I can have them overlap. So I'll do the same thing with the cobblestone, and I'll make them both fade into each other. And instead of going here and stopping, I'll come short, click, make a second one. Full occupancy, full occupancy. And instead of going full, I'll go a little bit less. And I'll just adjust the two until they fade together. And I can stretch them to make them overlap. And now it's not as noticeable. Instead of jumping straight from asphalt to cobblestone, they sort of blend together. And it becomes a more gradual thing. This is also good for changing from asphalt to dirt. So, find a dirt road. So instead of snapping from one to the other, fade it, fade it. And now it's gradual. So it changes from dirt to asphalt, and it's not as obvious. Let's get rid of this grid. And that's what it looks like. So it fades. This is also good for just making it a dead end, a road that just fades out. So the end of a dirt road. Instead of abruptly ending, you fade it. Now notice it fades between points, from one point to the next. So if you don't want it to fade through this entire area, what you have to do is next time you draw the road, you have to leave another segment. And the more segments, the more points of control you have. It also makes it a bit more complicated. Now let's say you make a perfect bend, but you want it to move the whole road, but you don't want to undo what you did. You click all points, and this allows you to move the entire thing. Multi-points is a bit weirder. It moves all the points up to a certain area. So see, the curve didn't change, but I can move the rest of it. It's kind of weird. I don't use that option very much. Width changes the width of the road when you make it. Railroads have to be set to 6. So if you place a railroad, if you want a train to ride on it, it has to be a width of 6. Must. Can't be anything else. If it's not a width of 6, the trains won't ride. And you have to be very careful to make sure the railroad's segments line up perfectly. Usually when you do a railroad, you want to do it once, all in one go. So that's again where the grid comes in. So you place the railroad, and you use the grid just to keep track of where you are. So if you look, this line is the one that I'm on. Click. As long as you don't move the mouse, it'll stay where it is. There you go. Click. Place down to the marker. Or on this line here. Click. And now you have this giant railroad. Click create, you'll see the railroad will show up on the map for you to see. See there, I made the railroad. It has to be 6. And the same thing, like if you have 2 different types of railroads and you want them to mesh together, that's again where you can use that fade. So this is a grass railroad. If you want it to change over the gravel, you don't want it to be a sharp transition. So you have 2 of them. That sharp transition kind of looks like crap. So what you do is you fade one, fade the other, and then have them overlap. And now it's not as obvious. The gravel kind of fades in and it turns into gravel. Now again, you have to be very careful to make sure the rails line up perfectly. Otherwise the train won't be able to navigate from one rail to the next. That's especially important when you're doing turns. So we can extend it as far as we want by just stretching it. But if you notice, we stretched it, and now the fade stretched as well. If you want the faded area to be only a certain length, you have to segment it. I didn't segment it. So instead of just going like this, you click in the middle and make 3 points. Now there's 3 points, which means I can not only bend it, but that more importantly means that I can fade this, and it'll fade up to that point. So instead of the entire thing fading, just that end fades. That way I can stretch the road all I want without having to fade the entire thing. Looks much nicer. It just gradually changes to gravel. And to delete it, I can't delete it in object because railroads aren't objects. I have to go to roads. Now I can delete it. To show you an example that I've already done, if you notice the railroads, I purposely faded the entire railroad a little bit so that the snow will bleed through. That way I could make it look kind of icy and stuff. And if you look here, you'll see them overlapping, and it's very important that they line up perfectly so that the train won't, hop the tracks and fall off. And while we're on the topic of trains, there's one more complicated thing about placing trains. So let's say you want to place a train down. When you place the train, it doesn't matter where you put it, it'll automatically snap to the nearest tracks. Now I tend to want to place it on the tracks anyway, just because that makes it easier to tell where the train is. So we'll place a train like that on the tracks. We can use this to change its orientation. Not that it's important. Now, let's say we want to connect a cart to it. If we just place it like that, the cart will just sit there. If you want the cart to connect, what you have to do is you have to drag the cart to it, and an arrow will appear. This means you're connecting this cart to this. Once you connect it, now these two are connected. See? They move together. Now if you pick on the cart, you can still move the cart around, but they're still registered as being connected. Now this is the complicated part that you don't want to screw up. Once you connect the cart, you don't want to move it anymore, because each item will have an attachment. So see, one linked unit. No links. This train has one cart connected to it. One linked unit. Now, if you screw it up and you want to undo it, you double click and it will unconnect the cart. So now these two items are separate again. You can start over. So we drag it until the arrow appears, let go, and now these two items are linked together. And you would do that with each and every cart that you want to place in order. But the key is, you don't want the cart connected to the train, you want it connected to the next cart. So you place each one you want, construct your train. Oh, see, I screwed it up already. I accidentally connected them. Didn't want to do that. Don't want that arrow to show up. So now what you do is you take each cart, click on it, ideally near where you want them to connect so you don't accidentally overlap them. Be very careful. So there's that arrow again. Now drag this cart, bring it closer until that arrow appears. Once the arrow appears, you let go. These are connected. Oh, freaking hell. Come on, let me click on it. Ah, see, I screwed it up. Now all three of them are interconnected in a weird way. See, 2 units linked. If 2 units are linked, you did something wrong. It's a double link. It's very difficult and very touchy. It's even harder to do from this angle. So you connect this to the train, connect this car to the coal car, and so on and so forth. And make sure you unselect the item before you click on another one, just to make sure you don't somehow connect them. There you go. Arrow shows up. Just drag until the arrow shows up. So these should all be connected now. So if we check on this cart, nothing linked. Good. Nothing's linked to it. It's the end of the train. Let's check this cart. Alright, that's a problem. There's supposed to be a cart linked to that. Why does it say nothing's linked to it? That's linked to it. What in the hell went wrong? Now I'm curious to find out what the hell went wrong. I'm going to test this out and see what happened. This is supposed to be me teaching you guys, and I'm struggling right now. This is a bit complicated. I've done it, though. I've done it. The last train I placed worked. Of course, it's much shorter, much less things to mess up.
Die Hölle auf Gleisen. Sofort.
See, train coal car's connected, but none of these other carts connect. So those last three are connected, and then these somehow did not connect. That's kind of annoying. Ah, and if you look there, that's something I'll show you later. Start how to make stuff. That's a neutral vehicle. It's civilian, so no one can control it. And I just exited to Windows like an idiot. Gosh. All right. So it's how you would do it. I did it wrong, but you see the point. It's touchy, but the idea is to make it work. You connect the carts by dragging until they overlap, and when the arrow appears, that means they're connected. So there, those are connected now. Yeah. Not gonna waste more time doing this. This video's probably like an hour long. I don't know how the hell I'm gonna upload this. Maybe I'll have to redo all of this and make one video for each thing individually. All that's left is, I mentioned start commands, and those are actually simple compared to that whole train business. What you do is you take an object. Let's do this tank here. This tank doesn't have any start commands yet. So I want this tank right here. If you look at the top, add start commands to selected unit. Now, it only works if you select a unit. See, right now the button is gray. You can't click on it. What you have to do is you have to click on a unit first. Now you can click it. And this will give you a menu. You can select a command from a whole list of them. So, swarm to, use spyglass. That'll only work for, like, officers. Load, leave, install, heal infantry, guard, follow. Some of these are a bit more complicated and weird. And again, in the help section, it'll define what they do. Swarm to, I think, means assault, whereas move means to just drive in a straight line. So we'll do swarm to. Damn it, thing. Alright. So the menu's up. Now, when I click, it places where that marker will be. If you look, it has the positions on the map, X and Y. And I can click and move it around. So I want him to swarm down this street to here. I click, that's where he's swarming to. We're done here. Just press X. Now if you click next to it, this is how you give it a sign to the new start command. Once a unit has a start command, like this gun doesn't have any start, you can assign one, but if you look next to it, that button's gray. That's because this gun has no commands given to it. Now that I've given this tank a command, this button next to it lights up. This is display all start commands for the selected unit. So this lets me see the list of all the commands that I've made. So if you see here, it says Swarm 2, then 2 stops were made by accident because I clicked the button too many times. I can remove those. Those were done by accident. This is where you go to remove start commands and also to edit them in case you screw it up. So let's say you want to add, you can also add from here, and it'll bring up the menu again. Stop. So it'll tell it to stop when it reaches that location. You don't need to do that though. So let's go remove that. And what that'll do is when we launch the match, that tank will automatically at the beginning of the match drive all on its own. And you can use this to tell the enemy to do things as well. So you can make the enemy attack you and stuff like that. And that's what I do to make it so that the enemy attacks this facility without using any fancy script. See? Moving all on his own. And I've set up this entire level just using those start commands. Now he's still my unit. I can still interrupt him and tell him to do things, but I won't bother. I'll let him finish. There you go. Leave the command. This little car here has a command. I commanded him to drive all the way down this street. Here. Then drive to here. 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 He's gonna park right in front of, right here. And this was dumb of me because it just so happens he parks in front of the driveway.
Hier,
And ends up blocking this truck.
schon auf dem
Something
Weg.
stupid that I did, something that I'll have to fix. In fact, I should probably fix that right now while I remember it. But funny thing that I did is this little, there he is. We'll watch him drive.
Hier. Jawohl, Herr Kommandant.
Ah shit. That's already started. So if you notice, they're not shooting at him. The reason why is I assigned this vehicle neutral. This half-track is neutral. I did that because I was kind of sick and tired of their armored transports getting blasted by machine guns. So I made them neutral just so that they'd slip past the line and deliver their cargo. You can do that. So this little... Where'd he go? Where'd he go? For the civilian cargo. He'll show up eventually. Because he's civilian... Ah, there he is. He's driving down a different road instead. That vehicle doesn't belong to me, which is why I can't see it. But there are friendly units standing inside the vehicle. When it arrives here, it'll unload its crew.
Erstatte Bericht. Ihre
You
Befehle?
can use that to sneak people around, so you can have like a sniper hide inside a civilian car that can drive right through friendly territory and then when it reaches its destination, off. Which is neat.
Jawohl, Herr
Do
Kommandant.
fancy missions and things. I can't tell him to get back in the car because I don't own that car. That bridge is about to get blown up. Now, someone asked me how I made the units, enemy units attack me in like waves. And I'll show you it's pretty much the same thing. It's all just start commands. So these tanks here, you check, start commands. Swarm 2, Swarm 2, Swarm 2. Now they have 3 Swarm 2 commands. What I made them do is, bring up the map. Instead of having all the units in the entire game, like all these allied units, there's actually a lot of them if you look. Instead of having them all swarm all at once, what I did is I had some of them were set to swarm to the town. Some of them were set instead to move all the way across the map back and forth, and I'd have them do laps. And only after they completed so many laps back and forth would they then proceed to swarm to the town. And having to do all those laps back and forth out here in the middle of nowhere wasted a lot of time, and I had them spread out so that the units would attack in waves. So by the time these guys here finished assaulting the town and were killed off, these guys over here would have finally finished off their laps and would then proceed to attack the town. And that spread them out so that they attack in larger waves. And also, you can also use that to attack what direction they attack from. So if you tell them move here to this bridge and then swarm by making multiple commands in a row, they'll move to the bridge and then they'll swarm here. And that will cause them to come from a different direction. Now, it's not the same as scripts. Scripts are more complicated and a lot more useful because what a script does is it's an if-then statement. What it'll do is it'll tell the units to do a certain command only after a certain thing has been done. So they won't move until a certain parameter is met. So you can have it so that they will attack only after a certain amount of time, which is a lot more simple than having them do laps back and forth. Or you can have it so that they'll attack only when provoked, or attack only when the enemy is spotted in a certain area. To do that is very complicated, though. I haven't quite figured that out myself, so I'm not going to bother going into that. But if you're like me and you're an idiot who doesn't know how to do script, the start commands are a really simple way to make things happen without having to do any fancy code. And that is really all there is to it. That's all I know. It's just placing down units and then giving them start commands and sitting back and watching the fireworks. That's all this is. I mean, most of the work has just been placing all these objects. So, just to do a quick recap, simple things. The grid, useful for lining things up. This button here with the little arrow keys makes sure things snap to the grid so that everything lines up. If you don't, they'll free float and then they won't line up quite as nice. The AI button is good for checking for passability to make sure that things aren't blocking. So, for example, you wouldn't quite realize it, but if you look here, this pole might appear to be over on the corner, but the box that it occupies is over to the left. You wouldn't know that unless you checked, and that'll tell you that soldiers that are walking around this corner will have to go all the way around. Not a big deal, but sometimes, for example, in these bushes, it tells you whether or not soldiers can walk through these bushes. Over here, they can walk through, because you can see there's gaps. If you turn off the trees, there's plenty of gaps here for the soldiers to walk through. But over here, it's much thicker. The soldiers can't walk through that. So that'll tell you if an area is passable or not. River, trees, textures. Delete things, use the delete key up above the arrow keys. And in order to interact with the map, you have to be in the certain menu that you want to interact with. So if you want to interact with buildings, you have to be in the object center. If you want to interact with bridges, you have to be in the bridge tab. And so on and so forth. And that's it. I hope this was helpful.